The Senate in a rare session yesterday. They'll be back to work today, and the House coming in coming in this evening. Any sign of hope that we can resolve this before Thursday? Burgess Everett covers the Congress for Politico, joining us in studio this morning. So what do you think, Burgess? Chances 50-50 we're going to go over the cliff, or bigger?
I don't know. I was pretty off when you had me on to predict the government shutdown. I think I said 30%, so I was, maybe not a good mark of mine.
And now we're into our third week.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think the best sign is McConnell and Reid are talking. These are two guys that think they are the most grown-up politicians in Washington right now. And, I mean, that's the only good sign, but it is a significant one because they have a long relationship and a long history of solving things at the last minute. So,
but that does mean, for one thing, that the obvious is that the whole play right now is in the Senate, not in the House, right?
And that play would kind of, depending on where you stand, would be to jam the House majority and say take it or leave it at the last second and force people to either vote to raise the debt ceiling or vote against their leadership.
Now, as I understand it, in the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats have agreed that they want to avoid default by raising the debt ceiling.
Correct.
There may be a difference on how long they raise it for, but they will raise the debt.
Democrats want longer, Republicans want shorter.
Right. But the fact that they both agree to raise it, not go over the cliff, is good.
Yes.
And they also agree that they will reopen the government. I guess the question there is, as I understand it, this is really in form of a question.
Yes, sure, go ahead.
To you, that the question is, under what budget terms will they reopen the government?
Correct. So Democrats theoretically would like the government to have a continuing resolution for as long as possible. However, there's a new sequester round of cuts in January. So if you have current spending levels anywhere past, I believe, January 15th, you actually get a $21 billion cut, mostly in defense. So Democrats want to avoid that, and the Republicans, especially in the Senate, they've often pointed to this Budget Control Act in 2011, which was the last debt ceiling crisis. This is also what brought us the sequester. They want to stick by these numbers, the spending numbers.
Yeah.
So that's 2 or 3 months ago, McConnell, he's always hated Obamacare, yes, but he's always been about lock in these lower spending levels because this has been a victory for the Republican Party, and that's basically what it's down to again at this point.
So, but it seems to me that at least there's a potential there that they could work those two differences out.
Right. Somebody's going to be unhappy because if the lower spending levels is going to really upset the liberal wing of the Senate Democrats, and all Republicans would be probably pretty upset if they were too high.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this morning Dick Durbin said we're talking about a $70 billion interest. That's a lot of money, but they could cut that in half, or they could reach whatever middle. I guess what I'm saying is it looks like there's the makings of a deal in the Senate.
Sure.
The big question is, if it passes the Senate with 100 votes, which it won't, but if it passes whatever, with 70 votes or 60 votes, and goes to the House, what are the chances that Boehner can get anything through this House?
Well, it's less about whether he could get it through, I think, and more of whether he would want to put it on the floor and have a majority of his party.
So he could get it through if he would.
Look at the fiscal cliff deal earlier this year. The Senate passed it, I think, with 89 votes. When it comes to the House, and less than half the Republicans voted for it. But these are so different than these deadline-oriented bills are so different than immigration because, there really is this pressure at the last second to do something to, I don't know what the financial markets are going to look like this morning, but if they start tanking, this pressure is going to go up and up and up.
But and Boehner has said repeatedly before, we will not let the government default.
Right.
He said that. He's on the record. So Jan Boehner, it looks like the only way out of this is Boehner will in the end, have to make the decision that I'm going to let the entire House vote on this so that it would pass with Democrats and some Republicans.
Yep.
That which he has been unwilling to do for the last 3 weeks on keeping the government open.
Sure.
Why do we think he'll do it Thursday and not last week.
Well, I think we're jumping ahead because we're assuming that Reid and McConnell are going to get that deal for sure.
We are.
But if that happens, I mean, I just think that we're already in an unprecedented situation with the government being shut down for it'll be 2.5 weeks by Thursday, and the prospect of a default. I mean, Boehner has always been, thinking about business. How is this affecting businesses? Whatever. He's always into these broad fiscal ideas, more so than immigration, things like that. This has been his bread and butter, as he wants to reform the country and get him on a stable path. And I think not putting something to raise the debt ceiling on the floor is going to be the opposite of that ethos. So I think that's what would suggest Boehner would do that.
And he has every business organization today, from the Chamber of Commerce to the Business Roundtable to the American Banking Association to the National Association of Manufacturers, all telling him, don't let the government default.
Right. And my colleagues, Jake Sherman and John Bresnahan, have reporting quietly on the side, Boehner's considering a 6-week debt increase of his own. It would not be clean. It would probably do something to slight to Obamacare, but it's not intended to be completely objectionable to Democrats. So it could be, if these negotiations fall apart in the Senate, there could be a last-second backstop to avoid this. But it doesn't sound like that's what anyone would prefer at this point.
So the question we were kicking around in the last half hour, Burgess Everett with us from Politico, Politico.com, covers the Congress, is who we know that Ted Cruz is the architect of this strategy, right? And some people even call
the
it
defund Obamacare strategy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speaker
Cruz.
The way to get right. Speaker Cruz. Right. The way to shut down or delay or derail or whatever Obamacare is to shut down the government.
Right.
That strategy. Who's the leader of the other strategy among Republicans, which is this is crazy?
I mean, well, so we were talking about this before. Pete King from New York has been perhaps the loudest person, but quietly in the Senate, there's been a lot of all these guys that voted a week and a half ago on this cloture vote that voted against Cruz. Many of them have been publicly or privately warning against this strategy. So, I mean,
sure they have, like Susan Collins has,
yeah,
and Johnny Isakson has,
and
Bob Corker
Tom
has,
Coburn too,
and Tom Coburn too.
Yeah,
but I'm looking for like the equivalent of the Ted Cruz, the crusader, the champion,
right,
of voice of reason among the Republican Party. I mean, it's not Mitch McConnell who's afraid of his own shadow these days because of his
got primary concerns.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this constant story of inner turmoil within the Republican Party, right? And anything that reinforces that narrative, I think, especially the leadership in both chambers, is just does not want to keep going. I mean, they don't want internal fighting to be the story of the Republican Party, and someone just yelling at Ted Cruz publicly only exacerbates that problem. So I think another interesting thing
I hear that, but the result of that is, without anybody willing to stand up and take him on, then the Ted Cruz of this world and the Sarah Palins and the Mike Lees and the House Republican Tea Party caucus rule the day.
I don't think at this point in the Senate, Ted Cruz is really influencing the debate. I mean, the fact that you really haven't heard him bashing McConnell directly. He did put out a statement over the weekend that warned against backroom deals, which is essentially what this is. It's two guys going in a room saying what can pass the Senate, but that's the way legislation has been done forever.
I was going to say, there's nothing wrong with a backroom deal if you get the right deal.
So I'm not sure at what point what part Ted Cruz is playing in this right now. His rhetoric is not about defunding or really degrading Obamacare. It's been he's been calling for the Senate to pass these little House bills, which is almost like from last week, rhetoric from last week. So like, I'm not necessarily sure that people are really feeling any pressure from his ideology right now.
I was at the White House. Was it Friday? Thursday. No, it was Friday, when the the Senate Republicans met with the president.
Right.
I have to tell you, I tweeted out, Peter, I don't know whether you saw a photo. We were all standing out in the rain, as close as we could get to the front door of the White House, which was like a football field away, as the Republican senators walked out. And we were trying to get any of them to come over and talk to us.
None of them would, right?
Not one of them.
But then they came back to the Capitol and they talked to all of us. So I think that close-lip
because
strategy.
You were not in the rain.
And because they have to walk by us to get into their meeting rooms.
So what was their feeling about that?
They felt great after that meeting.
Really?
Especially
really?
this they hate to be called moderates, maybe the centrist-minded group of Republicans in the Senate, like John McCain, Isaacson, Burr, people like that, that had been kind of working quietly on a debt ceiling deal that turned into that Collins plan that sort of fell apart, but set the stage for these negotiations. And they were happy when they met with the president. I mean, nobody was in a bad mood. They all said it was a good, constructive meeting. So, I mean, the president started kind of whining and dining these guys about 7 or 8 months ago, and it seems to have paid off a little bit in terms of, it could have very easily just been them coming back and being like, the president won't negotiate. We don't know what to do now. But it wasn't that at all. It was a total opposite. So I got the feeling after that meeting that it had been better than anyone had expected going in there.
So it is interesting that the president has been able to, we don't have an agreement yet, but at least he has a good working relationship, certainly with House Democrats, with Senate Democrats, and with Senate Republicans.
Getting better. I don't know if I'd say good yet, but he's sought really
But they can sit down and have a good civil conversation and disagree. But the problem is, again, House Republicans, particularly because of the Tea Party caucus.
Right. And I don't know the intimates of why that deal between the House and the White House fell apart late last week, but it at least set the stage for Senate Republicans and Democrats who are more used to cooperating on legislation, given the way the Senate works, needing 60 votes to do a lot of things. So, in some ways it might be better that way because these are two factions that are more used to working together.